You radiate calm even in chaos. This is not a talent. It is a discipline sharpened through hardship, solitude, and the relentless pursuit of self-mastery. While others are swept by external events, torn between noise, urgency, and emotional turbulence, you remain anchored. You are the still eye of the storm. And make no mistake, this stillness is not emptiness. It is force restrained, precision contained. Most people do not understand calm because they have never met it within themselves. What they call calm is often numbness. What they call control is often suppression. But your calm is alive, a silent, steady fire that neither flickers nor fades, even as the world burns around you. This inner balance is not a product of comfort. It was forged in discomfort. You have faced the chaos of life not by running from it, but by walking straight into its core. You have lost things. You have let go of people. You have watched versions of yourself die, so that something truer could live. This is the origin of your calm. It was earned in the furnace of reality, not handed down through false promises of peace. That is why it unsettles others. Because when someone stands before you in panic, rage, or desperation, and they find in you no matching frequency, it feels like rejection. But it is not rejection. It is reflection. You are a mirror, and in that mirror, they see themselves without their mask of noise. They are left alone with their own restlessness, their own chaos, and for many, that is unbearable. People like storms, not because they enjoy suffering, but because storms are familiar. A storm outside gives them permission to ignore the one within, but your presence offers no such distraction. You do not rise to their bait. You do not feed their fire. You do not match their nervous system, and so they feel disarmed. Some mistake your calm for coldness. Some accuse you of arrogance, but these are projections. Attempts to explain a frequency they cannot feel yet. If they could sit with you long enough, silently, they might begin to sense it. Not with words, but with something deeper. A slow realization that your peace is not passive. It is watchful, aware, entirely alert. When chaos hits, people scramble for control. You don't. You breathe. You observe. You act only when action is required. This non-reactiveness is not laziness, it is mastery. Because you have trained yourself to understand that most reactions are driven by fear, not clarity. And you do not move from fear. You have learned that stillness often resolves more than force. In moments of confrontation, others raise their voices. You lower yours. They push. You lean back, not in surrender, but in measured dominance. You do not need to overpower. Your restraint is power. It speaks louder than shouting ever could. It declares, I will not be moved by chaos because I am not built on it. But let us be honest, this calm comes at a price. You have had to be the only one holding the center when everyone else lost it. You have felt the isolation of being the grounded one, the too composed one, the one others depend on but rarely understand. Your calm has often been mistaken for weakness until the fire came. And then they saw, when others broke, you remained. You do not seek control over others. You seek control over yourself. And that, paradoxically, is what gives you influence. Your mood does not fluctuate with opinion. Your focus does not fracture under pressure. You do not collapse when things fall apart, because you never relied on the external for your inner state to begin with. This is your quiet rebellion. While the world is loud, you remain clear. While the world is fast, you remain deliberate. While the world seeks attention, you seek truth. You do not need applause to affirm your stance. You do not require agreement to validate your insight. Your calm is not a pose. It is a consequence a consequence of hours spent in silence when others distracted themselves, a consequence of breathing through pain instead of avoiding it, a consequence of learning that what rises fast often collapses just as quickly. You are calm because you chose the long path, not the easy one. So when people say your aura is intimidating, what they mean is your calm forces them to face themselves. In a world that spins faster every day, your refusal to be rushed is powerful. In a society obsessed with appearance, your commitment to inner clarity is rare. You are not here to match their panic. You are here to offer an alternative, a deeper rhythm, a deeper way. And that, more than any loud display of dominance, is what makes your presence too much for most to handle. Because your calm is not empty. It is earned, and those who have not earned theirs will feel the distance. You don't chase, you attract. Not because you are indifferent, but because you are deeply aligned with your purpose. Your movements are intentional, your presence magnetic, not by effort, but by energy. People often misunderstand this stillness in you. They assume that if you are not pursuing, you must not be passionate. But they do not realize that true passion doesn't rush, it radiates. You do not need to grasp for anything. What belongs to you will recognize you. What is meant for you will feel your gravity. This is not arrogance, it is clarity. You've spent enough time in confusion to know the difference. You've chased before, you've begged before, you've tried to fit in, to earn love, to be chosen. And every time you did, a piece of your power slipped away until you stopped. Until you realized that chasing is the language of lack, that urgency is often a mask for fear. You decided to stop proving your worth and started embodying it instead. Now, your silence speaks volumes. Your absence is felt louder than your presence once was. You attract, not just because of who you are, but because of what you've overcome. People feel it in your energy, the weight of your experience, the patience in your voice, the way you look someone in the eye and don't flinch. You faced the dark and came back carrying light, not for display, but for direction. You no longer entertain what is misaligned just to fill a void. You know now, empty space is better than forced presence. You are no longer lured by shiny distractions or temporary affirmations. You have learned to be still, to trust timing, to trust yourself, and that stillness makes others restless. Because in a world that praises hustle, the one who sits quietly in strength becomes a mystery, a challenge, a reflection they don't know how to face. You are not passive. You are powerful. But your power is rooted, not reactive. It does not chase noise. It creates signal. When you walk into a room, you don't announce your arrival. You don't need to. The energy shifts. Eyes find you. Conversations pause. Not because you demanded attention, but because your aura claimed space. Unapologetically, effortlessly, you've come to realize that everything you chased in the past began to run. But everything you now embody arrives on its own. Opportunities seek you. Right people stay. Wrong ones fall away, sometimes violently, sometimes silently. You've learned not to mourn what leaves uninvited. You've learned not to force what resists. You simply return to center. And from that place, everything flows. You no longer seek to be chosen. You've chosen yourself fully, finally, and that choice echoes louder than any approval ever could. You see beyond masks. It is not a skill, it is a consequence of living awake, of being broken enough times that you had to study people's intentions, not just their words. You've learned to see the subtle signs, the tension behind a smile, the flicker in the eyes, the hesitation in a compliment. You don't just hear tone, you feel energy, And energy doesn't lie. Most people are not ready to be seen. Not really. They build personas, perfect their appearance, rehearse their responses. They walk into rooms hoping others will only see what they allow. But then they meet you. And suddenly, the mask doesn't hold. Not because you're trying to tear it down, but because you don't fall for it. You watch, you listen, you sense. You don't need evidence. You feel the truth before it's spoken. This ability is not welcomed by all. Some find it unnerving, because being truly seen means being truly vulnerable. And in a world where people are used to performing, the presence of someone who sees through illusion feels dangerous. It feels like exposure, so they either avoid you or are drawn to you obsessively, because the mirror you provide shows them who they are beneath the roles. But you do not expose people to hurt them. You expose them because you have been exposed yourself. You know what it's like to be stripped of illusion, to face yourself in silence, to sit in your own contradictions. That's why your gaze is sharp, but never cruel, honest, but never condemning. You see people not just for who they pretend to be, but for who they're afraid they are, and more importantly, for who they could become. This kind of insight is not about judgment. It's about awareness. You don't take people at face value. You don't confuse charm with character. You don't mistake charisma for integrity. You know how easily words can be weaponized. So you listen to the pauses between them. You pay attention to consistency, not just claims. You trust patterns over promises. And yet you are not cynical. You still believe in people. But your belief is grounded. You no longer hand out your trust like a gift. You make people earn it, not because you're hard-hearted, but because your vision is clear. You've been burned, betrayed, misunderstood. But instead of closing off, you opened your eyes, and now you walk through life with both intuition and intention, seeing clearly, speaking carefully, moving wisely. To those who wear masks, your presence is pressure. To those who have removed them, your presence is peace. Because when you see people, truly see them, they either run or rise, and you let them choose. You don't chase. You don't control. You simply reveal. You speak few words, but they land heavy. This is not by accident, and it is certainly not weakness. It is refinement. The result of mastering the silence that most people run from, while others flood conversations to fill their discomfort. You let your presence do the work. When you speak, people listen, not out of fear, but out of respect. Not because your voice is loud, but because it carries weight. Every word is chosen, every sentence sharpened by experience. You do not waste energy on proving your point. You embody it. In a world where so many are addicted to speaking first and thinking later, you have trained yourself in the opposite direction. You pause, you feel, you evaluate, and only then do you speak. This disturbs those who thrive on surface-level validation. They rely on reaction, but you offer reflection. You don't speak to impress, you speak to impact. And that kind of communication cannot be ignored. It doesn't entertain the ego. It penetrates it. People are often taken aback by how little you say in meetings, in conversations, even in conflict. But then you say one sentence, one precise, uncluttered sentence, and it shifts the entire direction. That is the power of internal clarity. That is the force of someone who has made peace with silence and does not fear the void. You've come to understand that noise is not power. Volume is not truth. Those who talk the most often know the least of themselves. Your silence is not absence. It is presence distilled. And when you do speak, it carries the full density of your experience, your observation, Your lived truth, it is not rehearsed. It is real. That's why it cuts through confusion like a blade. That's why it echoes in people's minds long after the conversation has ended. The impact of your words is not in their number, but in their substance. And that substance is earned through discipline. The discipline of listening more than you speak, observing more than you react, and feeling more than you explain. In your stillness, others meet themselves. In your words, they hear truths they've long avoided. That's why you are remembered, not for how much you said, but for how deeply it was felt. You make people confront themselves, not because you lecture them, not because you shame them, but because your presence alone reflects what they've avoided. You live in alignment, imperfect, yes, but honest. You hold yourself to a code, and that code has cost you ease, shortcuts, and sometimes connection. But it has earned you something greater: clarity. That clarity acts as a mirror to those around you, a mirror many aren't ready to look into. You walk into a space and people feel exposed, not because you're trying to judge, but because you aren't wearing the same masks they are. Your authenticity puts their performance at risk. They feel the unspoken challenge. Am I living in truth, or am I hiding? This is why your presence stirs discomfort, not because you are difficult, but because you are real, and realness is rare. You've spent time in the depths. You've faced your flaws, held your own shadows, admitted your lies. You've cried in silence, fallen without witnesses, and rebuilt with no applause. And now you carry that quiet authority, the kind that cannot be faked, the kind that reveals the gap between who someone is and who they pretend to be. Some will try to dim you. They will label you too intense, too serious, too much. But that is only because your very existence makes them feel too little, not in value, but in alignment. You make people question their choices, their distractions, their compromises. And when someone has lived for too long in avoidance, a single encounter with presence can feel like an earthquake. You do not try to fix people. You do not chase them into their hiding places. You simply stand in your own light, and that light forces others to notice their own shadows. Some will walk away. Let them. Some will stay and grow. Welcome them. Your energy is not meant for everyone, but it is meant to wake the few who are ready. That is your silent gift, not to comfort, but to challenge, not to impress, but to awaken, not to please, but to provoke truth. And though it may leave you alone at times, it also leaves you free. You know when to walk away quietly. You've learned the art of releasing without retaliation, not out of weakness, but out of strength. You no longer chase closure. You no longer explain your value. When the energy no longer aligns, you do not beg, you do not force. You exit with dignity, with finality. Walking away for you is not an escape, it is a statement, a clear refusal to be dragged into chaos, manipulation, or one-sided effort. You've come to understand that peace is more valuable than proximity, that respect is more important than attention, that self-loyalty is the foundation of every true connection. You've walked away from lovers who couldn't meet your depth, from friends who only knew you in fragments, from opportunities that asked you to shrink to fit. And with each departure, you reclaimed more of yourself. It wasn't easy. Letting go rarely is. But you have learned to trust the silence that follows, because in that silence, something always returns: clarity, strength, and often something better. You don't need drama to make a point. Your absence says everything. Your energy simply withdraws, and that void speaks louder than confrontation ever could. You do not need them to see your worth. You see it, you protect it, you honor it. And when you walk away, you don't look back. Not out of pride, but because you've already arrived at peace within yourself. You've been through fire and chose not to burn others. This is what sets you apart. The strength you carry is not the kind built on vengeance, not the kind that seeks power for the sake of control. Yours is the quiet strength of someone who has suffered deeply and decided not to make the world bleed, because they once did. That choice, again and again, is what makes your aura so powerful, because behind your composure is pain that could have become poison, but instead you turned it into wisdom. There was a time when the fire almost consumed you. Life tore through your plans, your trust, your sense of safety. It stripped you of illusions, left you raw, exposed. In those moments, you could have hardened. Many do. It's easy to become cold when you've been wounded. It's easy to lash out when everything inside is broken. But you didn't. You stayed with the pain. You felt it fully. You let it teach you instead of twist you. That's what transformed you, not the survival, but the way you chose to heal. Your scars are not visible to most, but they live beneath your silence, in the way you pause before speaking, in the way your eyes study a room, in the way you forgive but never forget. You've learned the patterns, the behaviors, the manipulation of broken people trying to break others, and you've chosen not to become one of them. That choice cost you. It required discipline. It required solitude, but it preserved your essence. Now you walk with fire, not in your hands to destroy, but in your eyes to awaken. People feel it. They sense that you are not to be taken lightly, not because you threaten, but because you've already endured worse than what they bring. Your calm is forged. Your grace is earned. And your power, it is the kind that doesn't have to announce itself. It simply is. You could have used your pain as a weapon. You could have built walls so high that no one could reach you. But instead, you created boundaries, firm yet fair. You built gates, not cages. You protect your peace, but you also invite in those who are willing to meet you with honesty, and that balance is rare, that strength of restraint, of inner mastery. It confuses those who are still controlled by their wounds. Many people will never understand how much strength it takes to stay soft in a world that tried to make you hard. They will misread your kindness as naivety, your empathy as weakness. Let them. You're not here to correct them. You're here to continue choosing the higher road, especially when it's the hardest. This is why your aura is too powerful for most, because they expect fire to rage. But yours illuminates. Your truth silently challenges others, not because you preach, not because you push, but because you live in such honest alignment with yourself that it forces people to question where they've been lying to themselves. You don't need to correct them. Your presence alone is enough. You are the quiet standard that others measure themselves against, even if they resent you for it. There is nothing performative about you. You say what you mean, and more importantly, you act in harmony with those words. This congruence between your inner world and outer life makes people uncomfortable, not because you are confrontational, but because you reveal what they are not. Your integrity shines a light on their compromises. Your consistency highlights their confusion, and your centeredness makes their chaos louder. You've learned that truth is not in declarations, but in demonstration. You don't talk about loyalty, you show it. You don't claim depth, you live it. And that quiet power unsettles those who are still hiding behind noise. You're not playing a role. You're not seeking applause. You've spent too long learning who you are to need validation from people who haven't done that work themselves. And so, your authenticity becomes pressure. People either rise in your presence or retreat from it. That's not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for how others respond to your truth. You are responsible for holding it, honoring it, living it, even when it costs you connection, even when it isolates you. Because you've seen what it costs to betray yourself, and you will never pay that price again. You walk through the world with clarity, and that clarity is contagious. It wakes people up, sometimes with inspiration, sometimes with discomfort, but always with impact. You don't ask others to follow your path. You simply walk it. And that walk, unwavering and real, speaks louder than any persuasion ever could. You radiate calm even in chaos. Not because you haven't felt fear, but because you've trained yourself not to live inside it. Where others lose themselves in panic, you remain grounded. You've learned to anchor yourself, not to the moment, but to your center. And that makes you different. Not untouchable, but unshakable. This kind of calm isn't accidental. It was built slowly, through trials, through heartbreak, through loss. You faced the unexpected, the unfair, the unbearable, and instead of crumbling, you turned inward. You learned how to breathe through storms, how to wait instead of react, how to respond with presence instead of panic. And now, your presence itself becomes a form of shelter. People sense it. They lean toward you when the world spins too fast. Not because you promise solutions, but because you embody stillness. And in that stillness, they remember their own strength. You don't fight to be heard. You become the silence that others listen to. You don't impose control. You create space for clarity. This calm, this steadiness is a rare kind of power, the kind that cannot be faked, the kind that only comes from mastering yourself when life refuses to cooperate. It is the power of discipline, of trust, of surrender, not to the chaos, but to the truth that you can withstand it. And that, above all else, is why your aura is too powerful for most to handle. Because you are not ruled by the storm. You are the one who walks through it, untouched, unchanged, unwavering.